The Auckland floods have wrecked your rental property and you're thinking, what do I do? Can my tenants still live in that property? Do I need to reduce the rent? And who's going to pay for the repairs? That's what we're going to cover in today's video. And while we're going to specifically talk about the Auckland floods, this will apply more generally for natural disasters, because when the weather kicks in your rental property, investors do have a lot of questions. Here's a case study from somebody on Facebook who said, advice needed. I've got an investment property where the ground floor garage, the laundry and the rumpus is completely flooded, and the tenant has now asked if I want to terminate the tenancy or even pay for their temporary accommodation. Now in this case, most of the essential rooms are not impacted. The bedrooms, the kitchen, the bathrooms, they're all upstairs and okay. And the investor did mention a rent reduction, but the tenants didn't seem interested. So can the tenants still live in the property, or can they just up and leave? To see if the tenants can still live in the property, we need to go to Section 59 of the Residential Tenancies Act, which is all about the destruction of properties. Now, if the property is so seriously damaged that it's uninhabitable, then the tenants can leave with just 2 days' notice. But if the house can still be lived in and is only partially destroyed, then the rent will need to be reduced. So it all comes down to that definition of the word uninhabitable. And the difficulty is, it is not defined in the Residential Tenancies Act, and it is not even defined in the Oxford English Dictionary. So how do we find out what uninhabitable means? We need to go to the Tenancy Tribunal, and we're going to look at old cases to see how they've defined it in the past. And the reason we're going to do that is if you and your tenant get into a dispute, you're going to end up at the Tenancy Tribunal, so we need to see where their head is at. And the way we'll figure this out is we need to search for old cases that mention Section 59 of the Residential Tenancies Act. And the way you do that is put Section 59 in quotation marks. That will give us cases that mention that part of the Act. The case we're going to look at today comes from December 2022, so it's very recent. And if you read that tribunal decision, you'll see that they mention a case from 2012 called Watkin versus Brazier Property Investments. This comes from directly after the Christchurch earthquakes. And in this case, the tenants in question were without power, water, and sewerage for a number of days. Now, did that mean that this property was uninhabitable? Well, according to the judge, even though there was structural damage to the toilet and there was no water or power, they said that the property was not completely uninhabitable. And the reason for that, because you might think that's weird, no water, no power, no sewage, is that that term uninhabitable depends on what was happening in the community at the time. And directly after the Christchurch earthquakes, there were a lot of properties that didn't have power, water, or sewage. So because that was the expectation of what was considered an inhabitable property at the time, this property would not be considered completely uninhabitable. Now apply that to our property investor from Facebook. The upstairs, the bedrooms, kitchen, bathroom, all fine. Only thing that's uninhabitable is the downstairs rumpus room, laundry, garage. Now, is that normal for a property in Auckland right now? The answer is yes. This property would still be considered partially inhabitable. The tenants can still live in it because it's only the downstairs that is soaked, and that would be considered normal for a property in Auckland at the moment because the whole community is experiencing that. That means that the tenants can't just leave with 2 days' notice. So the tenants can still live in the property, but the rent needs to reduce because part of the house has been destroyed and can't be used. Now let's say that this property was in Margaret in Auckland and had 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, 1 kitchen. Because this property also had a rumpus room, a separate laundry and a garage, it's reasonable to think that the landlord would be charging slightly more rent than a property that didn't have those features. So how would he figure out what to reduce the rent by? You'd go by Trade Me and you'd start by looking for properties that didn't have a rumpus room, that didn't have a laundry, that didn't have a garage. So you're looking for properties that are similar to what the tenant can still live in. And if you said that the current property is renting out for $700. That's what the tenants are paying. But if you took out the rumpus room, the laundry, the garage, maybe another tenant might be willing to pay, say, $600 for that property. So that's what you'd reduce the rent by. You'd go from $700 to $600. But you still need to negotiate in good faith with your tenants. And on top of that, once you agree to a rental discount, you need to document that either in a letter or by email stating what the rent is reducing to, and then also at what point the rent is going to increase again, which is once the repairs have been completed. So the landlord's got to reduce the rent, but you've still got to repair the property. So who's going to pay for that? Well, that's where insurance comes in. And there are two types of insurance you need to know about. The first is house insurance. This is going to pay to repair things like the carpets, any wallpaper, any structural issues with the property. And the first thing you need to do is get in contact with your insurance company to understand what your excess is, what you're going to pay. The second thing you need to talk to your insurance company about is the process for making a claim. You want to make that claim as soon as possible so that you get the money and can start to repair the property. The second type of insurance you need to know about is landlord's insurance. This is a specific type of insurance that property investors get when they're renting out properties. And the most important thing that property investors are thinking about at the moment is what's called loss of rent. So if your property is so damaged that a tenant cannot live in that property, loss of rent will pay their rent to you for up to 6 months while you're repairing that property. But that part, loss of rent, is not included in all landlord insurance policies. So while you're on your phone to your insurance company, ask what you're entitled to and whether you've got loss of rent. So what should property investors do? Well, if you're enjoying these types of videos, make sure you subscribe to our channel because we release new videos every Monday and Wednesday. And in these times of crisis, it's really important that everyone does the right thing. For landlords, that means repairing that property as soon as you possibly can. It means negotiating a rental discount with your tenants if their properties are partially destroyed, and getting on top of your insurance company to see what you're entitled to. But on top of that, it's really important to make sure that you, your family, and your tenants are safe in these turbulent times.